In this video, we're going to talk about the LineRenderer component and go over what all of the settings for it are used for. After that, I'm going to show you a simple little demonstration here using code, where we can actually update the value of the line as we move objects around. So in this example, you see as I move the cars around, the line will move positions to where the cars are. The line renderer can be used for so many things in your game. Some examples could be a waypoint system, a targeting system, making simulated rope, or even making lasers. If you're looking for a complete beginner course to learning Unity, be sure to check the link in the description to my new course on Udemy. And with that being said, let's jump right in and get started here. The line renderer is just a component that we can add to any game object. So I'm just going to create an empty game object here. I'm just going to call it line. We'll reset its transform, and now under component, I'm just going to add a component of type LineRenderer, and now we actually have a line on our game object. If we go and look at the component here, you can see a bunch of different options. So we have a loop option. That's only going to take place if we have multiple points. It'll close the last point to the first one. Let's first look at position. So we have 2 points here. One is at the origin and one is 1 unit away on the Z. So all this is a normal vector 3 here. We can set this to be anything. So if I set this to 10, now the line is 10 units long on the Z-axis. And we can add as many points as we want. So I'm just going to change this. Let's add 4. And I'm just going to make this line move around a bit. So let's change this one to 10. And then on this one, I'm going to go to 20. So now we have a bit of a little zigzag kind of line here. And now if we set the loop option, you can see it closes back. So if I set this a little bit further, if I do 30, and maybe we'll do -5 here, so it goes past. If we close it, now you can see the loop actually closes this path, and we have a full line. I'm just going to remove that for now. The next setting is the width. This is how thick the line is. So if we move this down, you can see it keeps getting thinner. And you can add points in here. If you double click, it's going to create another point. So we can make multiple points and change the size of the line over time. So if we make it thicker here, something like that. Now you can see you can create this line to be any shape you want. You can add some taper there. Next up is the color. This won't actually do anything yet because we don't have a material on our line. Corner vertices is going to control how many vertices you actually have on the corner. So right now we have none. So basically there's one vertex at the corner here, and that's why it's a sharp point. If we start increasing this, you can see it rounds. If I set this to 4, now it's going to make the corner a bit more round because it's adding more points. The more points we add, the smoother the line is going to get, but it is going to be a bit more processor heavy. So I'll change this down a bit more. I'll go to like 4 here or 5. Now the next one is end cap vertices, and this is the same thing but for the end. So if we look at the end of our line right now, it's just flat because there's no corners here. If I start adding them, the more I add, the more round that's going to get. The next setting is alignment. This controls how you see the line from the camera. So right now it's set to view. So if I move around the scene, anywhere I look, the line is going to look the same. It always changes to face the camera. We can change this, and if you put it on transform Z, this is basically going to make it more or less in the world space. It's not going to move to face the camera. So we can only see it on the Z direction. I'm going to change that back to view. Texture mode, we won't see a difference yet until we add a material. And we have some shadow and lighting options. This is if we want this line to be impacted by light in our scene and actually cast a shadow. Now by default, it's going to use world space. So if we look, our line is at 0, 0, 0 for the transform position, and that's where this is. So if I actually select this object and I start trying to move it around, notice the actual game object is moving. You can see in the transform there, but the line does not because it's using world space. Now if I uncheck this, and now I select this line and start moving around, the line is going to follow with the game object position. So using that, it's going to be relative to where the game object is. And whether you want to use this or not is really going to come down to what you're doing with your line. So if it's, say, something like a trajectory aim for a cannon, and that cannon's moving around the scene, you're going to want it to follow the cannon and not be in world space. Next up is a material. So let's just create a material here. I'll just leave it named as new material. Let's go back to our line. Now I'm going to drag this material in here. And you can see now it's just a normal gray material. Let's go to this material and I'm going to change the shader. And I'm going to use particles and just a standard unlit. So now if I set this to transparent, let's go back to the line. Now we can start changing the color here. So if I select this little icon here, I can change the color at this position. And it's a gradient. So we can make multiple points around. Now if I select the next one, we can change the last color. So I can make it red. And you can see it blends, and that's how our object will actually take it on the line. And you can double click on here and add multiple positions. So we can add, let's say, make it a bit purple in the middle. And now you can see this controls where we're putting it. And if you come up with something you like, you can actually click here to save a preset. And then you can switch between your presets anytime that you want. And the top ones here control the transparency. So if we select this, you can see it's alpha. So if I decrease that and then we look at it, you'll see it's going to start getting more transparent. You can't really see it right now because there's no objects in the scene, but that will actually be transparent. Now if we go back to our material, now I'm just going to select an unlit transparent shader, and for the texture, I'm just going to add this particle texture here. So now we can see our line looks very weird here. It's kind of an object in the middle, and then it looks really stretched here. If we go back to the line, this is where we can use the texture mode. So currently it's taking that one little particle image and stretching it. So if we change that, we can tile it, and now you can see a whole bunch of them here. And you can also set it per segment. So each little section of the line is going to use that image. So I'm going to change this back to tile. I'm going to delete this one, and I'm just going to set this to be all green. And notice our sprite is not changing. We just need to change the shader here. So now I'm going to use a particle standard shader again. And for the rendering mode, I'm just going to select cutout. And now it takes the background out, and all we have is the dots. So now if we look here, we have a dotted line. And you can see some of them look a bit strange there. That's because of our line here. So let's just actually set this back. And now they're more uniform. So they're a bit stretched. We could change that if we wanted to here. Or we could make them wider. So they're a bit wider. And now you could see if we wanted to, this could work as something like a dotted line from our player showing a position and where they're going to go. We could trace a path. And we don't actually have to display all these dots in the scene and create objects for them. We just use a single line with a texture on it. So that's using the LineRenderer component. Now let's talk about how we can actually use this from script. So I'm going to remove this scene and I'm going to go into a little mock scene here. And let's take something like this area with this parking lot and a bunch of cars here. So now one thing we're going to notice, if we draw lines between all of these cars, so let's make a game object. I'll just call this line. Now I'm going to move it on to the first car here. Let's add a LineRenderer component. And now I'm going to turn off world space. So it'll draw it from here locally. And then if we start looking, we can see, so we're drawing a line this way. So let's use the X instead. Okay, so now we have a point going to this car. Let's add another point. And here we'll draw it to this car. Let's add another. Draw it to this car. Let's add another. Now we're going to need to go this way. And we'll go back to this car. So say somewhere like there. So now if we look here, we have a line between each of these cars. But the thing is, if I take this car and I move it, the line's not going to follow that object. So if we want it to follow each of these objects, we're actually going to have to do this via a script. So let's add a script to our line renderer. I'm just going to call this, we'll call it line controller. Now I'm going to delete all of these positions. I'm just going to remove that. Let's open our line controller. Now on the script, the first thing we need to do is get a reference to our line renderer. So I'm just going to make a private line renderer. I'll just call it line renderer. In start, I'm going to do underscore line renderer equals get component line renderer. So now we have a reference to it. We have to get all of those points now. So if I just make an array, I'll serialize this so we see it in the inspector. So I'll make an array of transforms, and I'm going to call this car transforms. So now we can go back into Unity here. If we look at our script, we're going to have the option for transforms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock the inspector so I can drag all of them in. I'm going to select all of the cars, drag them in, unlock the inspector. And now if I look at the line here, we have a reference to all of these cars. You would need to make sure they're in the correct order doing it this way that you want the line to draw. So we'll go from this car to this car to there. So in this case, I do have the order correct. You need to make sure it's that way. Now we have a reference to all of those cars transformed. So let's go in here. And in start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use line renderer, and then we can do position.count. And this is going to give us how many positions we want to set. So what I can do is set this equal to car transforms.length. And now we're going to have the same amount of positions as we have cars. Now we need to go and set each one of those positions. So what I'm going to do is just make a for loop. We'll do int I equals 0. If I is less than car transforms.length, I plus plus. So now we're going to loop through everyone, and we just need to set the position. So we can do line renderer.set position. And then in here, we just need to pass in the index of the position and the position to draw the line to. So the index is I, and the position is going to be car transforms index I dot position. Now this should set every position for that car. Now if we look at our line in here, we have 0 for the position size. If we run the game, notice all of our positions populate now, but we don't actually see it yet. And that's because we're using local space. We just need to turn back on world space. And now we have our line. Let's move this car over here. So notice here, it didn't update at all once we moved the car. So the position's still over here. So let's stop the game. Let's go to line. And we just need to check in world space again, because that won't save when we change it at runtime. And the reason they're not moving is we're just running this once in start. So we just need to move this code into update. Now it's going to run every frame. So if we go back and run our game now, we see a line between each car. Let's go and select this car here. And now if I move this, you see the line follows it. So if we go here, we can select a different car. Let's move this guy over here. And here. So now all of our points are going to keep following each car. Okay, and now we have a simple line, and we can start changing the material on it. You could make an animated glowing particle system to use on here, or any different material you want to make it look nice. It could be a laser beam or a little smoke cloud. Now this is just the basics of the line renderer, but this should be enough to get you up and running with modifying the settings in the inspector, as well as modifying the settings in code. And just like we accessed all of these points in code, you can also do the same with any of these other settings. So you can change the width, everything else in between. If you check the line renderer page on the Unity documentation, you can see all of these settings that we talked about in more detail, showing you how to use them all. And then if you also switch to the scripting reference, you can see how to access all of those values in your script. So just like we did here with the points, you can change the color, the width, the gradient, the positions, anything you want here that you can change in the inspector. And if you click any of these links, you're going to get examples. I'll leave the link to this page in the description below. So I hope that helped you get started with the line renderer. I'll make some future videos as well showing how you could do things like making a laser beam or a rope system out of this. If you have any other tips on something you want to see made with the line renderer, please leave a comment below and I'll try to make a video. Thanks for watching.